Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Tip Tuesday. This is the Devin Gray edition. Devin and I were having a very fun chat earlier in the week just about helping new investors get started. Devin's been working with a couple of investor clients who are trying to find their first investment property, and we were just riffing. What kind of advice should we give them? What kind of questions were they asking? And I said, you know what, Devin? You're giving these people some really good tips. And I know the perfect time to talk about some of those tips. It would be Tip Tuesday. So this Tip Tuesday, we are going to give a few tips on how to decide what type of income property to invest in. There's a large variety out there, and picking the right one really sets you up for a great journey as an investor. So Devin, what is kind of the foundation of the conversation? What should we be thinking about when we're starting to make this decision?
Yeah, thanks, James, and hello, everybody. I want to go a little bit more on what you talked about with us meeting with investors. And so what we find is when we sit down with a brand new investor or a seasoned investor, but usually a brand new investor that really wants to take advantage of our expertise, and we take them through what we call a buyer intake, where we're talking about their goals and the direction and where they want to be and stuff like that. But then it gets down to the types of properties and where to invest in Edmonton and stuff like that. And it's interesting about how they actually get a little bit stumped in terms of, well, I don't necessarily really know. And obviously, as you said before, there's lots of different ways to invest. There's the BRRRR strategy. There's simply a buy and hold. There's, and then there's the various other things when it comes to doing fix and flips and various things like that. But even something as simple as just looking to do a buy and hold. I had a conversation with somebody the other day who asked about, we were going through the map that we have that talks about the various different neighborhoods. And obviously when you're around a major school, such as the University of Alberta, that's a great neighborhood. We all know that that's a wonderful neighborhood in Edmonton to invest in. And the question was then, what's it like to invest in student housing? What's that like? I don't know whether or not I should focus on students or not. Tell me more about that. And that's really where this idea to bring it to Tip Tuesday came from, in regards to how do you ultimately decide where you want to invest? If you talk to our power team property management company, Libertas, the first question he'll say that he always gets from everybody is, what's a great place to invest in Edmonton? And he says it's actually easier to talk about where not to invest, because there's so many great different neighborhoods to invest in Edmonton.
It's really true.
Yeah, it is. But they all obviously bring a different tenant profile. So that's where this really started from, James.
Well, that's a fascinating kind of approach, because you're right. There isn't a right answer. And, a lot of clients will say, well, tell me what to do. And it's like, well, there are a lot of different avenues that you can follow to make this work very successfully for yourself. So, maybe the first thing I would ask then, Devin, or the second thing I would ask is, what are some of the first questions you ask a client? Because they're going to ask you, Devin, how do I decide what type of property? Where should I invest? And you're going to say, well, let me ask you something first. So what are you going to start by asking?
Yeah, that for sure, James. And a lot of it is really just getting an understanding of what's important to them in terms of, because people always talk about, obviously everybody's really focused on the property. Obviously it's a big part. It can be very exciting and very anxious, and there's that wealth of emotions. But for someone such as myself and you, James, that have been investing for a long time, I do remind them that, yes, there's this euphoria of buying the property, but you're then dealing with the tenants for a really, really long time. And so you need to make sure that you know what type of tenant you are compatible with or not compatible with. And so I really get talking to them in regards to what are their plans in terms of, are they going to manage the property themselves? Or are they going to hire a property manager right away? How much property management experience do they have? Which really is none, which can lead to the suggestion that they probably should manage the property themselves to get it to be able to talk intelligently to a property manager. But I do like, and this was introduced and something that a lot of mogul agents talk about in regards to these four items, and kind of I'll just say them in no particular order. but ultimately, it's important for people to rank them. And that's what's important to them: cash flow, appreciation, vacancy, or tenant profile. And everybody usually migrates right towards cash flow. Well, of course, I want the most amount of cash flow. Okay. Well, another phrase that you introduced a long time ago is cash flow is earned, it's not given. So let's talk about what a lot of cash flow means. And so kind of walking them through then the idea that I can take you to, or us as a mobile team can take you to areas where there's a tremendous amount of cash flow, but the trade-off is that you are going to have to be a lot more of an active manager. And in a lot of times, somebody that's chasing the cash flow might burn themselves out from dealing with the tenants so quickly, especially from an inexperienced standpoint, because we all understand that we learn from our failures, but sometimes those failures can become really expensive, not only financially, but also emotionally, and people are checking out. And so from that standpoint, James, I find that once people fully understand, by buying in an area where you are always going to be attracting tenants and hardly have any chance of being vacant, that's an important thing to consider. If you're looking for a particular type of tenant profile, one where, perhaps it's families where, they're going to really set up roots and, be there for 4, 5, or 6 years. That's another thing that's worth talking about. There's areas in town where, appreciation is going to hold. A lot of people talk about, forced appreciation and putting value back into the property, but there's also a lot to be said for what areas are going to be resilient during tougher times and not necessarily be affected by a drop in its value as quickly as other areas. And then obviously there's cash flow. And usually what happens is that when you start to say, look, I want, I want my value to hold its appreciation, or I want my property to hold its appreciation. I want a great tenant profile, and I never want to be vacant. The odds are you're trading cash flow for all of those.
Makes perfect sense. And you're right. Cash flow is earned. A lot of people look at that number on paper and they say, okay, well, this cash flow number is bigger than that cash flow number, therefore I should go for the bigger cash flow. But once you kind of understand the full perspective of risk and reward and what needs to happen to earn that cash flow, there's other factors that come into consideration. So I often find, and maybe it's just the clients I talk to, but people end up wanting to go for a bit of a balanced approach. What I hear all the time is, oh yeah, good point. I don't want a sketchy property. I don't want difficult tenants, but I still want some pretty good cash flow. So what's the middle ground? So once somebody kind of decides they want to have a balanced approach, then what are some of the next considerations that we should start wrapping our heads around to start heading in the right direction towards a property that'll make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a ton of sense. Something else that I like to bring up with a lot of clients when they're trying to get a good sense of what is that trade-off for more active management and in terms of cash flow. And I'll say, you can take two identical bungalows that are side by side. They're worth exactly the same amount of money. Call it $400,000, but one's a single family house and one's a suited property. You're going to make way more money from a cash flow perspective off that suited property, than the single family house, but simply because of the fact that you have two tenants in that property compared to one.
Yeah.
Your cash flow will be higher, but your management will also be higher. And chances are something simply as easy as just the fact that you might see your tenant turnover be faster in that suited property than a single family house where the people might live there for 10, 12, 15 years. So that I found has been really beneficial to me and to the people I talk to in terms of really making it simplified that, okay, you're right. Two tenants in a property means more active management, even if they're both amazing. It just means that there's a chance that they're there's the odd noise factor. There might be the situation where they might have more people in their family that causes parking issues around the area. There's all those types of things that come into play. And so coming back to that conversation about, and I also want to, mention what I'd mentioned to this person about student housing is that with every situation, there's pros and there's cons. And so it's really about ultimately just getting an understanding about the lifestyle of a student, what their expectations are, do they stay for 12 months or do they move out, over 8 months? Well, I've heard that there's both, right? There's both situations. People get concerned about, extra wear and tear because they're technically still kids living in the house. Well, yes, you're going to attract that type of tenant profile potentially if the house isn't necessarily something that's going to attract a higher quality tenant who's really truly just there going to university to learn and to study most of the time. Those are all these little factors that come into play when you're talking about a tenant profile from a student housing perspective.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is everybody says, oh, students, they're going to party and wreck the place. And I always say, like, well, did you party and wreck the place when you were in school? And most people say, well, no, I was too busy trying to get the grades to not get kicked out. And I was like, exactly. Yeah. It is as cool of an idea as it is that students party. It's like a small section of them. A lot of students, I don't even know what tuition is nowadays. I'm old enough now that I get to say, back in my day, my tuition and books were $4,500. I'd be scared to ask, but for somebody who's investing that much into their educational experience, they're not just going to blow it on partying it away and not getting grades. I mean, you might as well just not go to school and party if that's what you want to do. So, it's great insight, Devin. It's great insight. So I guess what would be kind of the parting thought? Like we've kind of gone through what the conversation is going to look like if you're sitting down with a new investor client. And, we start by explaining, hey, there's a spectrum of risk and reward here. You want more cash flow. You're going to need to take on more risk factors in the terms of things that could go wrong or things that could be very time consuming. Once we get into a balanced approach, we start thinking about tenant profile and management style. And, to wrap it in a bow, like, what do we want to do to take action? I mean, obviously theorizing about choosing a property is great. But we know that, we were just talking about this before we started broadcasting, is deals always come up, but you still have to take that step forward into action to actually be a real estate investor. So, the last tip is, now that how we've decided on what kind of property we want, we've decided, we know what we want, what comes next.
Yeah, for sure. That's you start to take action. And that actually helps not only from an investor standpoint, but from anybody shopping for property. Is that once you clearly know what you want, it makes it a lot easier for the real estate agent to go and find that property. Now, it might not necessarily be available, but properties come up on the market all the time. But it does make it a lot easier for us realtors knowing specifically what it is we're looking for to get really dialed in, and more times than not, we're successful. But that really is it. It's about taking action and not getting caught up in the analysis paralysis.
Totally.
People are always concerned, not always, but some people get concerned about whether or not, all these bad things are going to happen. It doesn't happen like that. It's not just this constant, every day there's bad things. There will be some surprising negative things that happen, but there'll also be some wonderful things that happen. But if you don't ultimately take action, you're sitting on the sidelines forever, and you're never going to pull that trigger.
Yeah, that's so true, Devin. Is if you sit on the sidelines, it's almost like the time you spend analyzing, trying to get a slightly better deal, you miss out on return on investment because it took you an extra 2 years to buy a property. Well, you may have saved a few $1,000 buying something different, but you lost tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars of return on investment by just not even getting into the market in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, Devin, thanks for hopping in on Tip Tuesday and giving some great tips here. I mean, I'm sure everybody watching appreciates it. And for all you new investors, if you're thinking like, how do I get started and how do I decide what to invest in? Well, Devin's your guy. He knows how to help get started. He works with a lot of new investors, and this is a conversation we have with our clients at Mogul almost every single day. So we're happy to have it where everybody can tune in.